Out here, you say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am to anything with a skirt on. Out here, if you catch a man with his pants down, you apologize, even if you have to arrest him afterwards. Out here, you're a man and a gentleman, or you aren't anything at all. And God help you if you're not.
So as you probably know, the big controversial film release of this week is Michael Winterbottom's The Killer Inside Me. Now, I'm a big fan of Michael Winterbottom. I love 24-Hour Party People. I think he did the best film that Angelina Jolie has ever starred in with The Mighty Heart. And I think that with every film, he takes a completely different tack. He's one of those genuinely mercurial filmmakers, of which we have so few in modern cinema. Killer Inside Me is an adaptation of a Jim Thompson novel, and there's been a lot of fuss in the press about its depiction of violence against women. Without wishing to prolong this debate, I just wanted to weigh in very slightly with this. Michael Winterbottom was on the show last week, the Simon Mayo show, and we discussed at some length our different responses to the film. Simon Mayo really took against it, decided that the film was actually misogynist in its depiction of violence against women. I feel slightly differently in that I think that the violence against women is horrible, appalling, drawn out, protracted, and therefore repugnant, rather than in any way alluring. Interestingly enough, the BBFC, in their judgment on the film, which they passed 18 Uncut, have said, although there are portrayals of strong sexual and sadistic violence, the scenes in question do not eroticize or endorse sexual assault or pose a credible harm risk to viewers of 18 and over. Now, it's important to say two things. Firstly, this doesn't necessarily mean I like those scenes. I was concerned about their presence in the film in the same way that I was concerned about the elongated rape scene in Irreversible. As you remember, in that case, Gaspar Noé argued that the reason that scene should be so long is to make it all the more appalling. And certainly, Michael Winterbottom has talked about the fact that what would be much more morally problematic would be to present those scenes in a way that wasn't revolting. It's also worth saying that in the case of The Killer Inside Me, during particularly the first murder, actually the scene plays largely off of Casey Affleck's face rather than that of his victim. And in fact, I think what people think they've seen and what they've actually seen may be two different things. Personally, I found myself flinching and looking away, which one could argue is actually the kind of response that a scene like that should have. But what I wanted to say beyond that was, it's important that the entirety of the film doesn't get lost in the discussion about violence. In terms of it being an adaptation of Jim Thompson, it is pretty much the closest to the tone of Jim Thompson since the Little Scene James Foley adaptation After Dark, My Sweet, which had a terrific central performance by Jason Patric and a wonderful supporting performance by Bruce Dern. Also, the use of music is very, very well thought out. There was an early scene in which we see the central character singing along to One Hand Loose, and throughout the movie there is an indication that Winterbottom understands the heritage of the music that he's using. He understands that thin line between comedy and horror that you get in some of those tunes. So I want to say two things. The first thing is, do you agree that in order for violence against women to be portrayed properly on screen, it ought to be revolting, repulsive, horrendous, serious? It ought to make you want to walk out of the film. Secondly, do you think the film stands up in terms of a Thompson adaptation? And if you don't want to go and see the film, which some of you may well not want to do, which are the other films that you think have actually put Thompson on screen? As I said, After Dark, My Sweet remains a favourite for me, but I'd like to hear from you on both those issues.